Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at what many still call the match of the century, the 1972 World Chess Championship. Fischer versus Spassky.
Right.
We've gathered a bunch of sources, articles, notes, research, and the idea today is to really unpack it all. Go beyond just the chess moves.
Yeah, give it that 360-degree view. Because it wasn't just chess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We want to understand the layers, the personal stuff, the psychology, the whole geopolitical angle, what made this one so huge, so lasting.
And you really can't overstate that context. Calling it just a sports event, well, it misses almost everything. It was this massive cultural moment, right? A clash of ideologies playing out live, deep in the Cold War.
Nations watching, absolutely. And to get that weight, you need the history. The Soviet Union, they basically owned the World Chess Championship back then.
Oh, completely. Since 48 Botvinnik, right? 24 years straight, Soviet champions.
24 years.
And for the Soviets, chess wasn't just, a pastime. It was huge, a symbol of their intellectual might, proof of their system's superiority. It was state-sponsored, heavily promoted.
A national project.
Yep.
And then you've got the U.S., never had a world champ. And along comes Bobby Fischer, the American individualist, right?
Yeah.
The lone wolf taking on the Soviet machine.
That narrative was set instantly. The solitary genius versus the collective effort, U.S. individualism against Soviet collectivism. The symbolism was just baked in from the start.
Even getting Fischer to Reykjavik was, well, dramatic.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly.
His path through the candidates tournament was full of fireworks. He almost walked out, didn't he? Over things like cameras, schedules, extreme demands.
Meanwhile, Spassky's route was comparatively pretty smooth, but Fischer, he seemed to thrive on the conflict, or at least use it. Constantly making headlines, keeping everyone off balance with these demands.
Right. And it didn't stop. Before Reykjavik even kicked off, July 11th, 72. More demands. He wanted a bigger prize fund, specific camera rules, even down to the seating distances.
It looked like pure eccentricity to a lot of people. Maybe it partly was. But the sources suggest it was also about this obsessive focus on detail and deep mistrust.
Especially of the Soviets.
Exactly. He seemed convinced they'd try anything. Subtle signals, messing with the playing conditions, whatever. So he had to control everything in the environment. It was his way of feeling secure, perhaps.
So the tension is already sky high before move one. And then game one happens.
Yeah.
And bam. Instant drama. Fischer makes this unbelievable mistake in a drawn rook endgame.
Just stunning. Spassky smartly says no to the draw offer and takes the point.
What a start. And then it gets crazier. Game two, Fischer just refuses to play.
Yeah, the cameras again. He wouldn't budge. So a forfeit. He's down 2-0. One game lost on a blunder. One without even playing. People were seriously wondering, is this match actually going to happen?
But this is where things flip, right?
Yeah.
After that disastrous start, something clicks for Fischer.
Yeah.
Game three onwards, he goes on this incredible run. 11 games unbeaten.
Just historic. He starts taking Spassky apart. Game 3, 4, 5, 6. Huge wins. And then there's the famous Game 13.
Game 13, yeah. Why is that one singled out so often?
Well, partly the result, but also Fischer's opening choice. He played 1.c4, the English opening.
Which wasn't his usual style, was it? More of a Sicilian guy. Rui Lopez.
Precisely. So playing 1.c4, it was seen as a direct attempt to, quote, upset Spassky's preparation. Get him out of his comfort zone, off the main theoretical lines.
A psychological jab as much as a chess move.
Absolutely. And it worked. That relentless pressure, the surprises, Fischer just kept coming. By August 31st, it was over. 12.5 to 8.5. The Soviet streak was broken.
And looking at how they played, their styles were just so different, weren't they? And how those styles reacted under all that pressure is key.
Definitely. Fischer, you think of aggressive precision.
Right. Like total commitment in his preparation, amazing tactics, and just deadly in the endgame. But the sources also highlight his flexibility in this match, using odd lines like reviving the King's Gambit in Game 4.
Yeah, that wasn't just random. It was strategic unpredictability, a weapon in itself, keeping Spassky guessing.
And Spassky.
Spassky was the universal player. Super adaptable, happy in sharp tactical fights, comfortable in slow positional grinds, huge opening knowledge, Queen's Gambit, English is white, Grinfeld, Nimzo Indian is black. He could play anything.
His strength was that adaptability.
Yeah, but even that wasn't quite enough here. Under the weight of, representing the entire Soviet Union, Fischer's relentless find-the-best-move approach started to expose cracks. Spassky showed some unusual indecisiveness. The pressure was immense.
Which leads us straight into the mind games. the psychological warfare.
Oh, Fischer was a master. Off the board, all those demands created chaos, drew media like flies, kept everyone on edge.
He was pure theater sometimes, designed to unsettle Spassky, maybe.
Could be. And on the board, unexpected openings, plus that famous intense stare. He wasn't just playing the pieces, he was playing the man, trying to break Spassky's focus, his nerve.
And the sources show Spassky was feeling it. There are private letters where he talks about feeling personally responsible for Soviet prestige. Can you imagine carrying that?
It's an unbelievable burden for a chess match. And you could see his confidence dip as Fischer kept pulling out these surprising wins with offbeat stuff.
Like that blunder in Game 17, another rook endgame, right?
Exactly. A theoretically drawn position. A player like Spassky doesn't normally make that mistake. It just screams external pressure seeping in.
But Spassky, through it all, showed incredible class. That moment after Fischer forfeited Game 2, Spassky actually voted to continue the match.
Yeah, even though he'd won the game by default. It really highlights the contrast, doesn't it? Fischer pushing every possible edge, maybe even willing to let the match collapse. Spassky wanting to win, but win over the board with a certain dignity.
And their relationship, person to person, it was complex, too. There's that story about Fischer wanting his chair moved because he felt Spassky's handshake was off somehow.
A perceived slight, yeah. Shows how sensitive Fischer was, how dialed in to potential disrespect. Spassky denied it, apparently, but it just adds another layer of tension.
Yet, after it was all over, something like respect seemed to emerge.
Yeah, the sources talk about them having chats in the hallways, Spassky admitting Fischer deserved it, Fischer acknowledging Spassky's fighting spirit.
And that connection seems to have endured, oddly enough. Years later, the 1992 rematch in Yugoslavia, Spassky reportedly tried to talk Fischer out of his isolation, his anti-Semitic rants.
It suggests a kind of human connection, maybe even care, that went deeper than just being rivals.
So how do we try to understand these two, these incredibly complex figures clashing like this? Some sources use frameworks like Myers-Briggs, the MBTI, as a way in, acknowledging it's just a model, of course.
Right, it simplifies things, but it can offer some insights. Fischer is almost always pegged as an INTJ.
INTJ. Okay, break that down a bit for listeners who might not know MBTI.
Sure. An INT is introversion. Fischer was famously reclusive, and his intuition, he had this incredible vision for chess patterns, long-term strategy. T is thinking decisions based on logic, analysis, not so much on feelings or social harmony, very objective. And J is judging, needing structure, control plans, disliking ambiguity. You see that in the demands, the perfectionism.
That INTJ profile,
Yeah.
it kind of maps onto his behavior, doesn't it? The need for control, the combativeness, maybe less focus on social niceties. It wasn't just being difficult, it was maybe fundamental to how he operated.
Exactly. Trying to make the world fit his internal logical blueprint. That's a very INTJ way of operating.
And Spassky, the sources seem less certain there. INFP or INFJ?
Yeah, there's some debate, but both start with introversion. He was also quite private, studied alone, and N intuition, that holistic view of the game, smooth transitions.
So similar to Fischer there, but the F is
There's
different.
a difference. F is feeling. Spassky was seen as empathetic, considerate, hosting Fischer for dinner, that kind of thing. He weighed values, harmony, the human element more.
And the last letter, JVSP.
Right.
What does that suggest for Spassky?
Well, INFJ, for which I'm judging, might point to his structured training, his desire for a certain order, maybe social harmony, trying to keep things cordial.
Okay.
But INFP, for perceiving, could reflect his flexibility over the board, maybe that occasional indecisiveness. More adaptable, open to changing plans as things evolve, perhaps more sensitive to the emotional climate, too.
So if we use this MBTI comparison, what insights pop out?
Well, look at decisions. Fischer's thinking pure logic, what works best versus Spassky's feeling considering harmony, maybe the opponent's state. You see it in Fischer's hardline demands versus Spassky's gestures like offering draws or wanting to continue the match.
And structure versus flexibility. Fischer's judging need for defined plans clashing with Spassky's adaptability, maybe his perceiving side.
Right. Spassky could adapt, but Fischer's relentless structured assault eventually seemed to overwhelm that flexibility.
They're both intuitive, but maybe focused differently.
Possibly. Fischer's intuition seemed channeled through that intense logical drive, a visionary blueprint for winning. Spassky's intuition might have been broader, perhaps more value-driven, which maybe made him more vulnerable to Fischer's pure combativeness.
And just person to person.
Fischer's style, maybe less attuned to social cues, likely clashed with Spassky's more empathetic approach. Spassky seemed to want a certain professional respect. Fischer saw everything as part of the battle. It just added friction.
The legacy of this match,
Yeah.
it's just enormous, isn't it? Fischer winning wasn't just about the title. It really shook up the whole chess world.
Absolutely. That Soviet dominance just shattered, and it sparked this huge chess boom, especially in the U.S. and the West.
Right, you hear about clubs popping up, more tournaments, newspapers running chess columns.
Even schools started looking at chess differently. It inspired a whole new generation of players in the West, and indirectly, it pushed chess study forward, even setting the stage for computers getting involved later.
And ironically, Fischer's constant demands actually forced changes. FIDE, the Chess Federation, had to modernize.
Yeah, rules about broadcast, player conditions, things like that. It pushed chess towards being more professional.
And culturally, it just became this touchstone.
Oh, yeah. Movies like Pawn Sacrifice, documentaries, books. It's endlessly revisited. ABC's Wide World of Sports showed highlights. Chess became this unlikely global spectacle. Reykjavik still holds tournaments that reference 72.
Psychologists still talk about it too, right? Fischer as the INTJ tortured genius, Spassky as the INFP INFJ, showing the strain of representing an ideology.
Definitely. And chess theory itself got a huge jolt. Fischer's weird opening, Spassky's responses. Everyone had to reevaluate lines. Their games are still dissected today. Tactics, endgames, psychology.
So, of course, the aftermath for both players is complex. Fischer never defended the title, became this reclusive, controversial figure.
And Spassky eventually emigrated, which says a lot about the pressures within that Soviet system, the personal cost.
Yeah, the match almost feels like a warning, doesn't it? About the pressures of fame, ideology, what it can do to people.
So when you pull back Fischer versus Spassky, it's this incredibly rich story. Personal drives, national pride, Cold War politics, deep psychological clashes, all woven together.
Fischer's intense, maybe INTJ-driven, pursuit of logical perfection, hitting up against Spassky's adaptable, perhaps more feeling-oriented style. These frameworks, like MBTI, they're not perfect, but they offer a way to kind of sketch out that contrast.
How Fischer's focused vision met Spassky's more adaptable, maybe values-based approach?
They really tested each other in a way that grabbed the whole world. And it changed chess forever. It's still this key moment people study, historians, psychologists, chess players.
A timeless example of how individuals, shaped by who they are inside and the massive forces outside, can just completely redefine a field.
And maybe the thought to leave you, the listener, with is this. When we look back at huge rivalries like Fischer-Spassky, how much of what happened was down to pure skill over the board versus all those invisible things, the pressure, the mind games, the sheer clash of personalities? Where does one end and the other begin?
Yeah,